Welcome to the Further Light Podcast, presented by Wisconsin Freemasonry, helping you accomplish your Masonic goals through education and more light. And now, I present to you, Brother Chris Ludke.
Listeners, scholars, brothers, this is Brother Chris Ludke, and today I want to talk about, the modest and humble Tyler. So often an office held by a new guy that we're trying to get used to the line, really an office that should be held with great regard, an office that should be held by a past master, someone who knows Masonry. And I want to explore some of the ideas around the Tyler as well as we go through and explore sort of this concept. I'm taking my information from a few different sources. One, a Masonic Minutes from Missouri. So Grand Lodge of Missouri. I've got some information from Ashler College in Canada. And we're looking at this whole idea of the Tyler. Now, the origin of the word is one that likely comes from antiquity. It comes from the Latin, tegula. And what it meant was basically to cover, to hide something. So something meaning that you're obscuring our view of reality. It comes in part from old architecture. The Romans and then the medieval, so the great Gothic cathedrals, or many of them, would be built in brick or rough stone, which was then covered with oftentimes marble, limestone, or some other material. The Romans did this a great deal. It's why it comes from the Latin. And the idea was to make this building look really, truly spectacular, as if I had used fine materials, even though in reality the walls are rougher material. The person who would apply that new veneer, that marble to the surface, would be known as a Tyler, hence our use of the term. And we find it, for example, in the London Ordinance of 1382, we find the word Tyler. We find it in a number of very old sources going back primarily to the 14th and 15th centuries, typically spelled either Tyler or Tiler. Now, in its origin, oftentimes back in the 17 and 1800s, the blade of the Tyler's sword was wavy, never straight. This was because with a snake-shaped sword, it couldn't be sheathed very easily, so it always remained drawn and ready for use. It was made that way to remind us of the fiery sword that guarded the way back into the Garden of Eden. Now, this is something that has fallen by the wayside, but these traditions were there, and they were there for a reason. Now, historically, we know that medieval operative craft guilds guarded their trade secrets, not just in architecture or in masonry, but just about every craft guild you would come across, especially in the medieval and the Renaissance. They would post a sentry outside a meeting place to protect it from inspection or intrusion by the uninitiated, by people who hadn't been properly brought into the guild. This person was known as an outer guard or doorkeeper, and often was the most junior apprentice, someone who wasn't eligible to attend the trade discussions, but was trying to earn acceptance to get inside. From a Masonic perspective, this idea continues. In 1723, Anderson's Book of Constitutions, he mentions another brother to look after the door, but shall not be a member of it. And we see this again from the Grand Lodge, mentioning an officer who kept the door. And this is in its minutes of June of 1732, initially referring to a specific title as the Tyler, by the way, with a Y. In 1738, he's described as a brother, the doorkeeper to lock up all aprons. The word Tyler first appears in print in the same year, 1738 or so. These early Tylers would have worn very colorful clothes. So the Grand Lodge Tyler of 1736 was described as wearing a red waistcoat under a dark blue coat trimmed with gold lace, yellow trousers, and a large triangular hat. Not that he would have wanted to stand out at all in that garb. He even wore this uniform in public, as when delivering summons or in processions, and was often subject to ridicule, mimicking that old idea from the guilds that this should be the most junior member rather than the most senior. The ritual tells us that he is armed with the proper implement of his office, not only to ward off potential intruders, but also to symbolically guard the Book of Constitutions from alteration. This was described as a sharp instrument. Initially, a pointed trowel and later a sword would be used. And we've talked about this in terms of the trowel, using that as the inner guard and then the outer guard in the form of the Tyler. It gave him such great authority that even our military brethren of yesteryear were required to relinquish their swords before entering the lodge room. Today, our Tyler uses the sword only as an emblem, a single unsheathed sword. You could never imagine a Tyler actually trying to attack someone with a sword that's 50 years old, dull, and probably has not had a point at any point in its history. So, who is this Tyler? Well, he's appointed to his office. Traditionally, he was actually compensated for his duties because it's a very lonely position. You're outside of the lodge room. Should be a master mason, and today traditionally a past master who is respected and well informed in Masonic law and custom. His qualities must include a good memory, trustworthiness, dignity, gentility, understanding, sympathy, patience, and dedication. He need not be a member of the lodge, but if so, has the right to debate and vote. He recognizes and greets brethren, assuring us that they are duly qualified by being clean, not inebriated, and properly clothed. Properly clothed, by the way, meaning with an apron. He is a one-man welcoming committee for visitors, giving them the first and most important impression of his lodge. He assures that members and visitors sign the register. In the old days, when taverns and other non-permanent places were used, it was the Tyler's job to form or draw the lodge with chalk and charcoal. Within a rectangle, he displayed various Masonic emblems of the proper degree level. His classical duties included the preparation and service of notices and summons. He had the key to the apron box and was in charge of the lodge's possessions, arranging them properly for upcoming meetings and securing them afterward. He gave notice of the times of calling out and calling off, oversaw the proper preparation of candidates, and even collected visitors' dinner fees. The special Tyler's knock signals the lodge already in session that a qualified brother requests admission. The Tyler can refuse entry to anyone who he does not personally recognize or who cannot be properly vouched for by another brother. If this visitor is subsequently cleared by an examining committee, he will administer the Tyler's oath, basically promising that they are in fact a brother in good standing and all of this information. Today, oftentimes the Tyler may be called upon to actually question a brother, to know the ritual well enough that they can question them in the appropriate degrees and ascertain whether or not this is a duly qualified brother. They will ascertain whether the brother was regularly initiated, passed, and raised in a just and legally constituted lodge. That he stands not suspended or expelled, and that there is no other reason why he cannot hold communication with the brethren at the lodge. This is actually a pretty impressive job title. By the way, in those old pub lodges where he would have had to draw everything out on the floor, the Tyler would have also been responsible for cleaning it up, and oftentimes would have held a mop near his station, so that if a Cowan or eavesdropper forced their way in, he could immediately set to work destroying the emblems that might give away the secrets of Masonry. So I also want to deal with this issue of Cowans, because it's kind of interesting. So the Tyler is specifically warned to observe against the approach of Cowans and eavesdroppers and not allow their entry into the lodge. But what the heck is a Cowan? Theories abound in Masonic literature about the word's derivations from one of several languages with diverse meanings, such as dog, wrench, or just silly fellow. It's like it was translated by Monty Python. But leaving that aside, it probably was a 16th century Scottish operative term of contempt given to the ignorant or partially instructed laborer who hadn't completed the proper period of apprenticeship and who perhaps was skilled in only one of many facets of masonry. This person would have been known as a rough mason or dry diker, who built structures with unhewn stone and without mortar, typically walls, by the way. If you look at farm fields in England and Scotland, oftentimes they're unmortared stone walls. The stones keep you in position only by their own weight. His exclusion from guild membership was a necessary means of trade protection from competition by unskilled laborers. Some Cowans, though, were master masons who had been expelled or moved to another area without joining the local lodge. The old lodge of Kilwinning warned that under a penalty, a master mason should not employ a Cowan unless a regular craftsman was not found within 15 miles of the building site. In later times, though, they were employed by the guilds for their specific skills at lower compensation rates. Speculatively, the term Cowan refers to one who is not yet a master mason dropped for cause, or one who is unlawful Masonic knowledge, having been initiated or having communication with an irregular or clandestine lodge. The eavesdropper, however, is a more suspicious character. Eaves describing the space between a building's wall and the line where the rainwater drops from the roof. Here, the serendipitous listener could position himself, listening to the lodge and trying to learn some of the secrets. By the way, just a reminder, the interest in Masonic secrets goes back quite some ways, back to 1732 or so, when we start seeing Boaz and Jakin and many other writings about the Masonic secrets, because Masonry was so tied to the upper class that to belong to it in England for periods of time, you almost had to know about Masonry. And so this concept of eavesdroppers, today it sounds silly, who wants to listen to our ritual work? But back then it may have been a serious issue. That's why the London Times in about 1730 is running almost the entire Masonic ritual, because they want people to know. People are interested so that they can fit in. The modern eavesdropper receives his information from various sources and then masquerades as a Mason in order to obtain charity or some means of help. So what do we get? We get the lonely Tyler sitting outside the door during opening and closing, frequently asked in at some point. But the lonely Tyler becoming an incredibly important position within the lodge, and a very historical position within the lodge, arguably older than many of the other offices that we see, many of the other appointed offices that we see in the lodge today. They're given a sword, which at one time would have been useful, but today is more or less symbolic. But they're given an incredibly important job determining who should and should not be given entrance into that lodge of Freemasons. Sometimes the most humble jobs, the most modest positions, are the most important. And I would ask you to consider, in your lodge, what do you do with the Tyler? Do you give that to the lowest member, the newest Master Mason, and expect them to learn this, to find out, to be able to give a Tyler's oath or administer Tyler's questions to determine whether or not someone's a Mason? Or do you give it to a past master who you know is going to have that information, who's in a position to know all or pretty much all of the members of the lodge? Just something to reflect on. Thank you for joining me, Brother Chris Licky, and the entire Further Light team on your quest to find more light through Masonry.
Are you interested in learning more about Freemasonry in Wisconsin? Visit wisconsinmasons.org to learn more about Masonry and access further educational content and more light. Once again, that address is wimasons.org. Any questions, comments, or suggestions, please email us at education@wisconsinmasons.org. And thank you for listening.